Hey everyone, Danny here. Thanks so much for tuning in with me on this next episode. We're in episode number 231, and today want to read a couple short passages found in Mark chapter 7. Starting in verse 24, we're going to read about Jesus who honors a Syrophoenician woman, and then we'll follow that up with Jesus' healing of a deaf and mute man, starting in verse 31. So this will be Mark chapter 7, starting with verse 24. And I'd like to maybe just inject a few thoughts for you to consider, and as we just make our way through it, we'll unpack what we discover. So Mark chapter 7, verse 24. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrophoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. So this is it's fascinating, and I think I've spoken on this before, but we'll just kind of make our way through just briefly. But notice here that when Jesus is leaving the place that he had been spending some time in this vicinity of Tyre, he comes to a house, and he didn't want anyone to know where he was. He wanted to keep his presence secret, but he could not. And that's one thing that, as I just read and pick up on, that jumps out to me, is when Jesus' presence is somewhere, you can't help but know it. It can't be a secret, because though he wanted to keep a low profile because he wanted to be able to go and do and accomplish certain work, it could not be helped but his presence be made known. And this is true of, I believe, our churches today, and even beyond the walls of our churches, in just the circles that we travel and the things that we do. When the presence of the Lord is there, it can't be a secret, and it spreads. It spreads like wildfire, and so. But I think the same is true oppositely when the presence of God is not somewhere where it is. His presence is not resting, that too is no secret. And it's only when his presence is welcomed in a place and he is made welcome and made the showcase, the feature of our effort and our work, that it spreads, and it cannot be helped but to be made known. So moving on, it says, "In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by a demonic spirit came and fell at his feet." So she hears about him, and as soon as she hears, she acts. She comes to him. Why? Because she has a need. And this need causes her to, in desperation, come to do what she can. And I think that's the place where we have to find ourselves in our spiritual journeys, in our spiritual life. This place of desperation for either more of God or the next steps with God, or what have you, whatever, fill in the blank. But we have to find ourselves in a place of yearning for something. And it's easy for us to think, well, we shouldn't be always looking to get something from God. While that is true, we see countless times in the Bible of people having needs, needing something from God, and they come to Him in desperation, and He doesn't turn them away. He encounters them. He makes opportunity for them, and then He intervenes. Now, I know sometimes in our day it feels like there's moments where we need God from some thing in our lives that we need Him for, and we come to Him, and a lot of times it feels like we don't get anywhere with that. It seems unfair that, as we read in Scripture, that these people would come to Him and their issue would immediately be addressed. There's more working in our moments than we realize. And while sometimes the conclusion of our issues or our problems that we come to Him with may not seem to conclude and may still be actively issues, I think that it's of an utmost need that we continue to seek Him and to not come to a place of complacency. Because just think, if this woman had have thought to herself, what good is it if I go to Him? Maybe she's tried coming to Him before and she couldn't get to Him, or nothing, He didn't interact with her. Maybe there's more to the story that we don't know. But what if she had thought, what good is it? And so she did not come to Him, did not pursue Him, push through, I'm sure, the crowds to get to Him. She would have stopped just short of her of the deliverance that was available to them. But notice she takes the correct posture. She falls at His feet. And, what more of a humbling posture can you take than to fall at another's feet? And so she begs Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. And He poses to her some very, what seems like, harsh and difficult words to process. First, let the children eat all they want, He told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Well, the dogs here, He's referring to the Gentiles, those of non-Israelite descent. And He poses to her a moment of what will you do next with what you hear? And she very impressively replies, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And many of us, myself included, would be very taken aback by this comment of Jesus. I mean, we would probably kind of grasp our shirts and ask, are you calling us, or are you calling me a dog? It would be very easy to get offended at what He said. But notice that Jesus' intent isn't to offend the woman. Very likely, His intention is to show to her what is in her heart. He knows what she would say before she says it. So is it a surprise to Jesus how she would respond? Well, if he is indeed all-knowing in the state of his humanity, then of course he would know. But so then to pose a question to someone, if you already know the answer, well, then you're really trying to bring to the forefront insight for the person you're asking. So very likely here, Jesus is trying to highlight something to her. And she responds in the moment of question with much grace and humility. And so he responds to her and says, "For such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So this is critical, I believe, to understand or to notice because of how she processed what he told her. She was able to receive from him. And kind of picture this like a water faucet, and you have a bucket of water. And if you put the bucket directly under the faucet, turn it on, you're going to catch water. But if you put your bucket far to the side, turn it on, it doesn't catch anything. It's not in a position to receive. And I think when we carry offense and bitterness, or get offended, or get bitter, or get resentful, there's 100 things that she could have taken away from that moment other than her breakthrough. But she was postured in such a way, I would say, namely, humility. She was postured in such a way to receive from him exactly what she needed. And even, I would say, even added to that, received what she wanted. Yes, here, wanted and needed are likely overlapping one another. She wanted deliverance for her daughter. She needed deliverance for her daughter. But I think sometimes there is an availability of want and need, even if they don't describe the same thing. So I think that is something to consider in this story. So we'll just kind of close that one up. But I think it's important to discover what was made available and how she appropriately responded to it. So then, moving on in verse 31, we find, and the text reads, "Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, 'Ephphatha,' which means, 'be opened.' At this the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. 'He has done everything well,' they said. 'He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak.'" So there's several really fascinating things that we can unpack and discover here. Remember, this man was deaf and he could hardly talk. So there's a little bit of talking available to him, but hardly, but he was deaf. It's, as I was reading this, it struck me, there are times when Jesus interacts with his people that he comes to, asks them questions. Do you want to be made well? or or what do you want me to do for you? But notice Jesus doesn't dialogue with the man. He doesn't ask the man a question. Well, you may say, well, that's because he was deaf. Well, I think so too. But which says to me the practicality of Jesus. He wasn't rigid in his approach, and he didn't follow this like parameter of approaching his interactions in a certain way. He was very fluid. And also notice that the man didn't ask for healing. There were people there who begged Jesus to place his hand on him. They interceded for him. And so how important it is to have people around you who will go on to the Lord on your behalf for your need. So that's important. So, but Jesus, he approaches this man and he intervenes. Now, something else that's fascinating, we could probably spend a good bit of time thinking about this strange way Jesus goes about it. He puts his fingers in the man's ears, he spits, and he touches the man's tongue. How strange is that? And no doubt there's something to discover there, whether it's the fact that the Father showed him to do it that way, to just get obedience from Jesus. There's lots of things you could probably unpack there, but so that aside, we see that this man received his healing. His ears were opened, his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak plainly. But fascinatingly, Jesus he commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. Jesus also knew that after telling them not to say anything, he knew they would. Yet he didn't not heal the man. He knew that they would not follow the command, and he healed them anyways. So I think that's very special, because a lot of times we think that we have to do things just right, a certain way to have the Lord's favor to intervene in our situations. Well, that's not true. And I think it puts a lot of stress and difficulty in our journey to think that that's the way God operates. If you do this, then this will result. And so I think this kind of sheds some light on our misconception about how God necessarily operates. We're not able to put him in a box and to define him in any certain way. So I think that's very important for us to remember. The more he told them not to tell, the more they kept telling people. And in the end, people were amazed and overwhelmed, and they said he has done everything well. I think this is so huge a reason why we need the acts of healing today in our lives and in those even non-Christians. God intervening in people's lives, healing them, mending their afflictions is so important, because it shows people, it establishes that, wow, God really is here doing things and making differences in our lives. And that amazement serves as a witness, a testimony to God's power, his sovereignty over sickness and disease, dysfunction. And so this is why we must seek to be a conduit for God to move through, operate through. And so if we can just agree with him and make those attempts, we may not, we may fail 99 times out of 100. But remember, it's not us doing it anyways. It's God who is doing it. We are simply trusting him, stepping out in faith, praying for the sick, laying our hands on people, and hoping in faith that God does something, because he felt sympathy and compassion for them as well, just like we hopefully are. So I think that's the 2 points I really wanted to drive today. I hope it sheds a little bit of interesting light, gives you something to chew on, and just increases your faith and hope and expectation for what God wants to do in and through your life. And so thank you for this time together, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. God bless.